Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Close Encounters podcast. In this episode, we'll be talking with American-based speaker, vlogger and author of Terror Strikes about his book and how his observations of real-world events inspired him to pen the book and how it all ties in together. We'll also be talking briefly about conspiracy theories, UFOs and the paranormal, but very briefly because we did overrun again, as just seems to be the new norm. But before all that, we will have a look at my 4 favourite interesting news articles from the past week in That's What I Call News. Then I will cover the next event penciled in for the NIUFOS event in April. Then finally finish off with a look ahead to the celestial events of the upcoming week. And now, without any further delay, let's move on to That's What I Call News. Yes, That's What I Call News. It's the segment of my more interesting, weird and paranormal news from around the world that you may not get in your daily dose of mainstream media, news and media, I suppose is the word we're looking for. Let us start off with demonic possession thought to be on the rise. Now, this is coming from ancientorigins.net. Seems to be a regular source I always stumble across, but it's thought that demonic possession and the ancient art of exorcism are on the rise, and that's according to the Catholic Church. Back as far as 2013, the Vatican anticipated this and sought to train up several exorcists to counter the problem. The Vatican blames the apparent rise in demonic possessions on an increased number of people dabbling in what it calls the dark arts, including using information found on the internet and the use of Ouija boards. Some of the listed signs of demonic possession are speaking in an unknown language, vomiting nails, and that is iron nails, nails that you use to drive into wood, glass and other dangerous objects, along with uncontrollable shaking. Now, it's funny because when I met with Fra MacDonald of Shadowhunters NI in the run-up to Christmas in 2022, we spoke about this and his involvement in it. He even showed me rather haunting footage of an exorcism that took place down in Dublin, and the face of the woman possessed was, it literally morphed and contorted while she was talking. Gibberish is the best thing I could say, and a god-awful voice, absolutely horrendous. It still plays on my mind to this day, and we're a handful of months gone past my initial viewing of it. But the lesson here is, don't dabble in things you don't know how to do or how it works. Keeping in theme with Ouija boards, we'll go over to Coast AM. It's reported that Ouija boards are blamed for hospitalizing 28 schoolgirls in Colombia. Now, it's uncertain whether these claims hold any legitimacy, but some parents of the 28 hospitalized schoolgirls blamed their use of an Ouija board for their ailments. The girls in question all suffered fainting episodes and symptoms related to anxiety in February of this year, that is 2023. According to the article, though, a similar incident happened in Colombia last year in November, where students were found to be writhing in pain from muscle spasms and vomiting after making use of an Ouija board. Again, my own advice here would be, even if you're remotely curious about an Ouija board, and this comes from my own experiences too, I haven't had any negative experiences with Ouija boards because I've never used an Ouija board, but don't do it unless you know exactly what to do or being guided by somebody who knows what to do. In fact, I would not even use an Ouija board, but rather use an alternative known as an angel board, which is said to attract positive energies and entities as well. I've used an angel board before, both with Shadowhunters NI and with various other groups around the UK, and I must say the results are just as interesting and a hell of a lot more safer, I will tell you that. Let us jump over to the telegraph.co.uk, where it's reported that leading scientists have joined forces to determine if life on Earth was a fluke or not. An international team of scientists have joined forces and founded the Origins Federation to specifically search for life outside of our solar system. With well over 5,000 reported exoplanets discovered to date, orbiting far-flung stars, the team from various universities intend to search for biosignatures, which would indicate life as we know it at that, I suppose. And they intend to do it each time the planet passes in front of its host star by looking at the sort of chemical spectrum that they can detect. Now, I believe that this will be one of their biggest stumbling blocks because you're limiting your search to the confines of our understanding and model it for the basis of life to evolve. But I guess it's a step in the right direction, and it'll be something to keep an eye on over the next decade or so. I'm sure the results will be interesting either way, and I wish them all the best in their endeavour. And finally, let's go over to bigthink.com, where it's reported that a team of Italian scientists suggest that Mars may be harbouring saltwater lakes under the Martian South Pole. Now, granted, this news is a little old, but in keeping with the theme of ET life, and I guess in case you've missed it, a little closer to home, a team of Italian scientists suggest that Mars' South Pole, may contain a large lake and 3 ponds of liquid water. It's been indicated that these bodies of water, with a combined area estimated to be around 29,000 square miles, or 1/5 the size of Germany, as is in the article here, lie under the surface and are in liquid form due to the possible salt content within them. And if that's the case, it's thought that the presence of water could be a great contender for other life forms to be in existence within our own solar system, be it microbial or advanced aquatic life. Now, I should imagine that this would be a key area of interest, rather, for future Mars missions, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if they did find life there, however small it may be. Now, let's end that there and move on to the interview. So, if like me, you're watching what's going on in the world, thinking how turbulent and dangerous it is, then you might be interested in our next guest. He's an accomplished author from Detroit, USA, and describes himself as a US patriot, conservative, and upholder of values of honour, integrity, and patriotism. His book, Terror Strikes, though a work of fiction, draws upon real-world events and even the French astrologer Nostradamus. Joseph has also had a few UFO and paranormal encounters himself, which we'll also talk about this evening, and I'm pleased to say Joseph is with me now. Joseph, how is everything with you and over your side of the pond?
Well, I've said for decades, so I have my character say it in Terror Strikes coming soon to a city near you. Remember, things could always be better, but they could often be worse.
Ain't that the truth? That is so true. I mean, us in the UK and Ireland, the worst thing that could happen to us during the day is miserable weather. Sometimes we're always complaining about the weather, but you know it could always be worse, like you say.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I'm looking out my window right now, and it's a rather ugly day here today. It's freezing rain, cold temperature, so yuck.
I mean, I'm sat in England at the minute with work, and I'm hearing back at home it's really icy and cold over there. But out here, it's just it's miserable and wet as hell out there. We've had better days, but I guess we could have worse days. We could have I don't know, a grade 6 tornado or something ripping through the area. But first of all, Joseph, let us talk a little bit about your book, actually. So, tell us a little bit about your book and how you come to write it.
Well, I've been writing my whole life. I kind of got the creative gene from my father's side. He founded Ted Leonard Jr. and the Polka Kings. You can still find their vinyl albums out there. uh, so I dabbled in, wrote and recorded music and all that, but I never got a record deal to, go beyond that. And, in the 70s and 80s, you still had to have that in order to amount to anything to sell anywhere, unlike today. And it's the same with books, with self publishing. You can do anything and everything through the internet now and sell things directly. So I kept writing. I've published things over the years, but locally Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You was my first internationally published book. And like most of my writings, they my books generally come to me in my dreams. I have no idea why. I don't question it. I go with it. And that was no different. I actually had the dream in 2006. And, there was much more going on regarding terrorism at that particular time. I had a beginning, I had a middle, I had my end, but I just didn't feel comfortable enough releasing it. I felt there were holes. I felt there was something missing. I felt that I needed to wait. Well, I figured I'd wait a couple years. 15 years later, in 2021, the dream came back. And I realized, okay, this makes sense that now is the time. 2022 was the time to release it because people have been inundated with the Wuhan virus paranoia for 2.5 years, and terrorism hasn't really been on their radar. It's not that it went away, it hadn't. It's just that it wasn't in the fore of their mind because they weren't seeing it on the news like they were. So, in my mind, now is the perfect time to, as one reviewer said, a much needed wake up call and warning uh, to bring this to people. And it's not just about terrorism, it's about Martin, a Detroit newspaper man who decides to write a book about terrorism. So that lays the groundwork for like a book within a book and the general overall storyline of terrorism. But it is about so much more, so many things interwoven into that. I like to say, not a book about death, a book about life over death, love over hate, good over evil. All those human nature, human spirit, human hopes and fears, desires in a book, but under that terrorism umbrella, because again, people have gone back to sleep. And it's not just about 9/11, because, you might think when people think terrorism, people's minds generally go to 9/11 now. But there's a chapter on Toronto, Ontario, Canada, London, England, Madrid, Spain, Tokyo, Japan. So it's about global terrorism, not just the American perspective of terrorism. And I have something that's on the bottom of my terrorstrikes.info website, a disclaimer that I like to read. It says, fair warning, while some historical aspects are mixed within, because it's historical fiction, I call it faction, because unfortunately these days our education system is very lacking, it seems, and we don't teach anyone anything. And as the saying goes, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. It goes on to say this is a fictional story with fictional characters. Many deem this book controversial and upsetting in many places, which it is meant to be. It's meant to make people think. It's not a shoot 'em up, blood and guts kind of thing. Challenge their own and others' intentions, motives, own morality, and mortality.
Uh, I mean, you got to use the shock factor. At least you're using it properly. You've got like mindless celebrities that are using shock factor nowadays to try and remain relevant, strangely enough. But the shock factor in this instance is definitely well needed because that's what makes people sit up and pay attention. And it's also funny that you said about terrorism. I mean, I was fooled. It seems, into thinking that terrorism took a hiatus. So it turns out that the terrorists aren't actually adhering to social distancing rules. It's still it's still actually happening, but it's just not a major focus at the moment.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I like to say, I am not peddling fear porn. I am not trying to make you paranoid. I want you to recognize the main theme is live your life. Just don't be stupid, right? You cannot live with a reckless abandon like things going on around you cannot or may not affect you, right? Like I say in the uh, also on the webpage, out of the Naperville chapter, one of the characters is Teresa. Teresa realized she was far more an ostrich, lacking any situational awareness on this topic of either terrorism or general crime. General crime could find you any minute around any corner, right? And then the mama bear she needed to be to protect her young child. And uh, that's an important thing. Again, live, but be awake and alert to what's going on. You purposefully use mama bear, the protector, and ostrich. If an ostrich wanders onto the train tracks, hears the horn, buries its head between the tracks, is not going to stop it from being bowled over by the train just because it doesn't see and hear it coming because its head's buried in the sand.
That's actually a fantastic metaphor. To be fair, basically the takeaway.
Oh, wait a minute. How dare you? How dare you? I used a metaphor? No, no, no. I am far too clever. I don't use metaphors. I use meta sixes. But bum.
Meta six. I'm stealing. I'm stealing that one. The
You know, right? And that's an important. I like to interject humor, and that's an important thing.
It is
There's a
because it makes people pay
comic
attention as well.
Yeah, there's a comic relief chapter in this very serious book to make that very point. You've got to keep a sense of humor, or you'll be curled in the corner in the fetal position, sucking on your thumb, crying all the time. And again, this is about life and living. Don't be paranoid, just don't be stupid.
Exactly, and the humor is a fantastic coping mechanism for any sort of uncomfortable and strange situation that people find themselves in. And the takeaway from what you're saying is that despite what's going on in the world, uh, Darwinism still applies. So it is the survival of the smartest and the fittest. So don't just bury your head in the sand. Be very alert indeed, and never a truer work has been spoken. I must say, um, the
Hope,
book I feel
let,
would. Sorry, go ahead.
let, let me say this. Hope is a wonderful thing. It is not a strategy.
No, it is. It is a wonderful thing, but unfortunately, sometimes hopes and prayers just aren't enough for some certain things in the world. But hope is what actually helps people strive on and gets them back up whenever they fall back down. You know,
And in fact, my character Martin's wife's name is named Hope. Again, it's obvious meaning there to convey that idea. Hope, yes, but it's not a strategy.
no, I mean, yeah, it's true. I mean, I was reading some of the reviews for your book as well, and a lot of people say that how you have written the book in such a beautiful way, where you weave emotions into characters, and key points into your characters as well. A lot of people say it's a beautifully written book, which is why it's definitely on my Amazon wish list. Definitely wish to read that. In the not too distant future. In our first contact, you'd mentioned Nostradamus and a prophecy of his. How much of an influence has Nostradamus had in writing this book?
I this particular book to some degree because I think it relates and I think it's important. I think it matters. Nostradamus has been a fascination for countless people for a long time, and of course, when 9/11 happened, people went to Nostradamus's writings and tried to see if indeed he predicted it, which I think he did. I'm holding one of many books I have on Nostradamus right here. Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies for the Future by Mario Redding. Reading or Redding, I'm not sure how he pronounces it. Uh, I'm going to give first the quatrain that I think applies. Then I want to talk about the quatrain that I think people misapply to 9/11. And again, my book is not just about 9/11. It's about terrorism in general. And I hate to have to make this disclaimer, but you do because I get the accusations I'm racist, I'm sexist, I'm homophobic, I'm Islamophobic, blah, 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 by people who, of course, have not read the book, do not know me, don't understand what's going on in the book because none of that is in there.
I like to call them armchair
It,
warriors.
yeah, it is the antithesis of all those things. Love over fake hate is a chapter name. And they ought to sit down and read that chapter. But yeah, not all terrorists are Muslim. Not all Muslims are terrorists. Not all Arabs are Muslims. Not all Muslims are Arabs. Blah, 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 blah. You get where I'm going with that, right? There
Definitely,
are,
having come from
there,
Northern Ireland, we've had our own fair share of terrorism, and they were mostly from Christian factions, whether it was Catholic or Protestant.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. I don't think they were Arabic in descent nor Muslim. Exactly. That is exactly my point. Uh, Various groups, and I've written a piece on the dichotomy of one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, right? It's a fine line potentially where that falls. Like uh, Osama bin Laden himself. We He was fighting with us on our side in the Mujahideen against the Soviets in Afghanistan originally. And then when we drove the Soviets out, they decided, well, let's take on the other superpower and became our enemy and therefore our terrorists, right? But back to Nostradamus. Uh, Quatrain 1049. The world's garden near the new city in the roadway hollow mountains, the structures, they will be seized and plunged into the sewers. People will be forced to drink the sulfur poisoned waters. Now, hindsight is always 2020. It is really obvious and clear what that stands for if you know Nostradamus, studied him at all, and understand how he wrote his quatrains in symbolic terms, and or obviously he's looking at the future. He doesn't necessarily know of this place called the United States. He doesn't know there's this city going to be called New York City, but often he refers to it as New City. And to him at his time, that would obviously make sense. Uh, and you've got to understand, he uses a lot of symbology. He changes up his language. It's not all in his native French because he had to fool people of his time. Or if you were a prophet and the church liked you, you were okay. But if you weren't sanctioned by the church, you'd have been burned at the stake as a witch and a heretic. So, he had to write carefully in his time to be interpreted in the future when he was long gone. Now, the other quatrain is 187. Excuse me, I'm going to take a quick sip here.
no, that's fine. I mean, I even need to do it as well. There must be at least two podcasts beforehand where I've had a coughing fit because I've been talking that much. My throat got tickly, and I've had to have a sip of tea or water. So I've got a cup of tea here on standby just in case I do need it. So I totally understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I've got allergies, so I'm on some sinus meds, which does what? Further dries you up,
It
gives you
does, yeah.
more cotton mouth than what you would normally have. Well, 187 says, earth shaking, a fire from the center of the earth will shake the towers of the new city. And that's where people automatically then gravitate. Ah, the Twin Towers. It's got to be. Not necessarily. uh, as a result, two great rocks will fight a long war until Arethusan springs bloody the river of fresh. Now, that to me is the important key here why that was not 9/11. It is a future prediction about an attack by Iran upon Tel Aviv and New York City with nuclear warheads. And I say that because Arethusa, the symbology there to me is the key. Arethusa was the goddess of the Mediterranean. Okay? While what's in the Mediterranean? Again, you have to think over the long term time. We're not talking about Iran now per se, because Iran does not touch the Mediterranean, right? However, they have designs like Al Qaeda on forming a caliphate and returning to the great Persian Empire, which did extend all the way to the Mediterranean at that time. So you've got to understand it all in historical perspective to put it all together. And that's my interpretation. Nostradamus himself said he saw a lot of horrible things and he hoped that they wouldn't come to pass. I certainly hope it won't come to pass and that I'm wrong, but it's like the balloon bomb thing, the balloon thing the other day, the spy balloon. People are laughing it off and joking. Oh, what do you think? They're going to strap nuclear weapons to a balloon? Well, people, I discuss in Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You history that people don't know. The Japanese Air Force did strike and kill Americans on the mainland during World War II using balloon
That's
bombs.
correct. I remember reading about that. They used they waited for the jet stream to be at its optimal, in its sort of path around the Earth, in order to launch those balloons to get the balloons as far in mainland USA as they could.
In fact, the Manhattan Project, it was kept quiet, obviously, at the time because we didn't want the enemy to know how effective their balloon bombs were being. Now, the Manhattan Project got interrupted a few times because of bombs getting close. Now, China has sophisticated ICBMs, right? They don't need to strap a nuke to a balloon to send over. North Korea, on the other hand, could make use of a crude nuke or a crude EMP attached to a balloon to attack America with. And it's the same thing with Iran. They keep saying, I hear all the time, well, they're so many years away. They're never, ICBMs, they are decades away. I don't need an ICBM. I can take a crude nuclear device that Iran is likely around the corner getting, put it on a cargo ship, park one off Tel Aviv in the Mediterranean, park one off New York City in the ocean, and detonate them at the same time. Because these people are crazy. They are murder suicide bombers as it is. So they have no compunction about blowing themselves up at the same time to attack us.
It's like a form of indoctrination that a lot of people go through, a radicalization. And it takes me back to what you were saying earlier on about education, what have you. I was going to say that nowadays education, you go to school to be told how to think now. Um, or wrong, sorry, you're to be told what to think as opposed to being told how to think as education should be, which again,
Amen.
in a sense, is a form of indoctrination, isn't it?
Yes. And that is one of the sub themes in the book, hope Martin's wife. They send their three daughters, do still go to public school. But one of the reasons why he's writing his book and becoming an author is in the hopes that they will then have the extra income to move away from the urban center to a more rural setting and him become maybe the editor in chief of a smaller paper so that their children can grow up in a slower community, a more peaceful community and lifestyle. And Hope unindoctrinates, for a lack of a better term. She makes sure she uh, gets together with their daughters. What are you learning? What have you learned? Let me see your books. You must be involved because not everybody can homeschool, right? But you at least must be involved with your child's education to know what manure is being put into their heads. And if they don't match your values, that you can counter it. And or if they're being taught this Howard Zinn rewritten history garbage as featured in the Good Will Hunting movie, that's all propaganda, hate the West, hate America, hate everything, hate the nation that has given you everything that you have today. Uh, as dangerous as the terrorists are in wanting to destroy and tear down our own culture, the greatest culture, the Western culture, the free markets, the individual freedom, the overturning of slavery in all its senses and forms to give us individual rights and ability to achieve for ourselves over those who want to enslave us. There are those who hate our own nation, and are trying to destroy us as if something else, their unicorn fart fantasies, is going to make things better when for thousands of years we've waited for this system to come along and free people.
Uh, Definitely. I mean, a lot of people nowadays, and they take their freedoms for granted,
Yep.
and they'll berate it, they'll curse it, etc. Again, I mean, NIUFOS is politically neutral by all shape and form. So my opinion here is no way reflective of NIUFOS as a society. It's mine, but there are people in the world who do seem to be indoctrinated by an unseen hand, for example, um, and seem to be hell bent on marching the rest of society towards a one world dictatorship. And I spoke about that briefly in my last episode, actually, with Lee Taylor from England, who studied this stuff for over 30 years, 3 decades of studying this stuff and watching the world progress and seeing how much it's changed in the space of even a decade, the recent decade as well. It's scary how people are blindly marching into a potential one world government dictatorship where every aspect of your life is dictated by a select few people.
Yeah, and they want that because they are the nanny state people themselves. They don't like you having your freedom. They want you to act how they want you to act. They want you to think like they want you to think. They want you to speak like they want you to speak. That's why we're seeing all this censorship. And one of the biggest things, in funny in some respects, is the blatant, clear hypocrisy. You've got people wandering around on $1,000 iPhones in $300 designer shoes and $100 designer pants, complaining, complaining about greed and excess.
I know. You see those sort of people sat in Starbucks sipping their really expensive coffee on their latest MacBook, berating all the privileges that everyone has in
Yep.
Western nations.
If
I just want. Sorry, I want
if
to go back
yeah,
to
if you don't like it, go to Cuba and wait in the bread line under that system that you profess to love so much. You
I
know
know
that
so many
they
people
won't.
who come from communist backgrounds. I'm talking. There's an elderly man I know from. I can't remember what country it was. Wasn't you? It was USSR, but not the Russian part of it. And even he says that he would never, ever want to return back to a communistic lifestyle. He hated it. The food shortages, being told what to think. He even told me, and I'm shocked at this, and it relates, it reflects, as it 1984 so well, where even they as children were told to effectively spy on their parents and report it back to authoritative
Yep.
figures to see whether they
Yep.
were thinking or doing the wrong thing.
The Hitler Jungen hasn't disappeared. It exists. They're trying to get it here in America too, like it's indoctrinating the children to hate their parents, spy on their parents, and oh crud! I had a thought that now that train has left the station. Well, because you're talking to, yeah, people who escaped from behind the Iron Curtain and that. I know several. They are the most staunch freedom lovers there are, because they've lived under that dictatorship and, in that system. And every time you tell somebody, look at there, it failed. Oh, I remember what it was. They say, well, they just didn't do it right. We're so much smarter than all these failures before us. We'll actually somehow do it right. What they really mean is they will be the ruling elite who have things. We will all be part of the peasant class who have nothing. And all they really care about is that they get theirs. They don't care about whether you're starving to death or not, despite their empty rhetoric to the otherwise. And communism isn't new. A lot of people don't know this because, again, we don't teach history. In the United States, the Bradford colony, the Mayflower Compact it was founded as a commonwealth. That's communism. Commonwealth. No one owned anything. Everybody owned it as a collective. They all were supposed to work for the benefits of all and each other, right? What happened? They damn near all starved to death because John Doe sees that John Q. Public is eating like a horse, but putting in zero of the work. So John Doe, being a human and human nature, saying, well, why should I work as hard? So he works less. And sooner or later, and this happens always under socialism, communism, and fascism, it dumbs everything down. Everything is brought down. It drags things down. It never lifts things up. They damn near starved to death, instituted free market principles, and bingo, America is what it is today.
And it is. You just have to take a look at the USSR, for example, under communism. One of the fattest people there was Stalin. While his
Yeah,
citizens were skinny as hell, and then you take a look at North Korea, the fattest person there is their glorious leader, while everyone else in the country is skinny as hell because they're obviously starving, what have you. I'll leave that topic now because I want to go back to sort of Nostradamus again, because I want your sort of personal opinion on this. So he was a renowned seer, especially in these modern times. Like you say, you've got this book, and you can apply a lot of his prophecies to modern events right now. How many of his prophecies, in your opinion, that you're aware of, have come to pass?
Oh, that's hard to say. You can't give a percentage because things you may have thought uh, didn't happen, you may have been in misinterpreting, like I said, the one quatrain, people misapplying. It wasn't wrong, it just hasn't applied yet, in my opinion. And scholars have studied Nostradamus, you know, for more than a century, obviously, multiple centuries. So we're always interpreting and reinterpreting, and hindsight is always the 2020. You can try to apply things and think you can see what he saw and hopefully try to change it, but you don't know. You may have misapplied, but we know countless prophecies have come true. Hitler used Nostradamus' prophecy at the beginning of the war to let the French know they were going to be pounded into the dust. But Hitler, of course, conveniently wanted to leave out, and we in the West, mainly Churchill, then dropped additional Nostradamus prophecies over Germany, which predicted that Germany would ultimately be pounded into the dust.
And I guess it's a war of information and a war of minds as well. Um,
Yep.
but again, I suppose because of how poetic some of his writings are, you probably could apply it to certain things. And then again, like you've pointed out earlier on, there's like glaring obvious correlations between what he'd saw and things that have happened, and some things have yet to happen yet. I should assume. But that's what people make of it, I suppose. I wonder if it is a bit like horoscopes. Can you sort of interpret it in certain ways, depending on how you want? I don't know, because I'm aware of Nostradamus, obviously. Everyone is. There's something wrong with you if you're not aware of Nostradamus. But I'm not overly familiar with his work like you would be. So I find this topic rather fascinating to listen to. In my last episode, I was discussing conspiracy theories with Lee Taylor, who I said earlier on, 30 years experience of studying UFOs and conspiracy theories and all that sort of stuff. And we spoke about the theory that a secretive elite were controlling what was actually happening in the world in order to achieve an overall goal. Do you subscribe to that? Which I think you already do from what we were talking about earlier, but do you subscribe to that? And if so, who and why are they doing it?
Well, it's all part of human nature. I mean, uh, as the saying goes, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Uh, it's part of our nature. Uh, Often we have to fight it to not want to be the alpha, right? To say, I know better than everybody else. You will bend to my will. So power and control is just a part and parcel of the hubris of the people who aspire to office. They have big egos. They have big desires. They want the power and control over others at the expense of others. They don't, whatever. The evil will always rationalize their evil. And but back, just one more thing on like Nostradamus and Seers. I mean, there are others like Edgar Casey was a 20th century seer and prophet, and a lot of people follow him because he's more around in our times, and he wrote in English, so people can easily read the original for themselves. But is there conspiracy? I would dare say it's not even a conspiracy. You could go to the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab's own website, and read their plans for yourself. There's no conspiracy anymore. It's right out in the open.
It's hidden in plain sight, as you would say. Like I said in the last episode, that I used to be a magician and what have you, and we were talking about misdirection, what have you. But another skill that us magicians use is to hide things in plain sight, and one of them is
Mm,
a coin vanish. Now, I'm not a member of any magic society, so I can sort of give a secret away here. But there's a trick where I give the illusion of two coins. One disappears, and then you put two coins in someone's hand. One disappears, and then it reappears like just beside them. But because you're focusing all their attention on the coins in their hand, they only focus on those two coins in the hand and not the third duplicate one that's hidden just beside them until you bring their attention onto it. Again, it's a classic
exactly.
case of things being hidden in plain sight,
Yes.
which is a very useful skill to have, I must say. So I'm familiar with that one. Um,
I touch on that in Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You because it is a terror tactic. Misdirection, the same concept. Look over here while we're going to do something over there.
That was a tactic that was used by paramilitaries here in Northern Ireland during the height of the Troubles. Unfortunately, a lot of innocent people succumb to explosions and haven't died from their injuries, etc., because of that. All too real for people in Northern Ireland when you speak about that. I want to go off topic just a little bit, and then we might talk about briefly your paranormal encounters. You mentioned earlier on that right at the very start, that you had this sort of creative flair to write a book and what have you. It all come from a dream. And, you were sort of waiting for the right time to compose it and release it, etc. Now, there's times that I myself get flares of creativity. I feel like I really want to write something, don't know what it is. I want to put pen to paper, uh, but uh, I don't know where to go with it. I don't know, where do I start? What do I do? How do I sit down and piece all these ideas together? You have another book out, which you published, which offers tips and advice on writing and publishing a book. So, for any of our listeners who may be like me, perhaps an aspiring author at some point, what advice would you give them now?
Absolutely, yes. Great segue. Uh, I've been on many podcasts, and yeah, obviously we want to talk about paranormal and things of that nature because that's the primary focus of your show normally. And one of the eager reasons why I wanted to come on with you is to discuss that. But yes, I've been on uh, countless shows. Who knows? Lost track of people gracious and graciously allowing me, like you, to come on and talk about the book as well as the other things. So I talk about Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You, and invariably many of them would say, hey, would you come back and just talk generically about writing and publishing? And I'd say, sure. So after a dozen of those, I said, hey, dummy, that's a book, right? So I came up with, I put all my other projects on hold and penned and released in record time. It only took 3 months. How to write a book and get it published, hints, tips, and techniques. And it's not just for like someone like you or perhaps someone in your audience who has a UFO story or a paranormal story they feel they have in them they want to tell, but don't really know what to do. I Googled, or I didn't Google, but I went on Amazon, and sure enough, there's a bazillion books how to publish a book onto Amazon. Well, that's not what people ask. And also, it's not just for someone who's an aspiring published author, it's also for the curious, the avid reader. Think of it as a tell all without me dropping a bunch of names, a behind the scenes book. How did your author conceive their book, write their book, publish their book, promote their book? All those things you don't think about that an author does you can now get the behind the scenes look at. So, yeah, I thought, yes, we need this from concept to writing to publishing to promoting, what to expect about reviews, all of that in one stop shopping rather than you buying 5 different books on the various different topics.
Yeah, because in the paranormal and UFO community, you get a load of people who are naturally creative and they have these flares to write or even draw, be artists, etc. So that what I will do, not only will I put a link into, just your website and the Terror Strikes book, but I'll also supply a link to your book on how to write a book and get it published as well,
Right.
because
Yeah. Now
this
there's
community
no.
is perfect, or that book is perfect for this sort of community and what have you. And finally, just in the last sort of couple of minutes that we have got, you had also said that you had paranormal and UFO knowledge or encounters to share. Do you mind sharing that with us, just as
No,
a sign off?
I love to come on shows like this and share those kinds of things rather than being on the regular. Welcome to the book show. Tell us about your book. You know, yeah, dull, boring, same questions, same answers. Mind you, I do those things. I have to, obviously, to promote. And the one last thing about how to write a book and get it published. Yeah, there's no one right way. Everybody's style is different too. So I try to give you options to help you structure yourself for what will work for you to get a book done and out. Uh, I because again, there's no one right way. There's suggestions and for you to discover then what works for you. But definitely start with a story outline. Whenever the spirit moves you, jot down notes and bring them all together later. But start with a story outline. But yeah, my UFO experience is rather dull. I was young. I saw something in the sky. By definition, not knowing what it was makes it a UFO. Now, hindsight, years later, it was probably a satellite, right? I don't know. I'd love to say I'm sure it was an alien craft, but I can't say that. But my orb story in that is far more in the paranormal realm and definitely, you know, beyond our current explanations of physics. I went with my sister and her husband at the time, my brother in law, to Fort Wayne, which is a pre 1812 built fort preparing for the War of 1812. We knew we were going to go back at it with the British, basically through a proxy war with Canada. So that fort was built. And of course, lots of people died there. People say it's haunted. So we went on a ghost hunt one night there. And indeed, we unfortunately didn't encounter any entities that they say are there and inhabit the particular barrack or dorm or whatever. But what we did encounter were orbs in the armory. And, these aren't tricks of light because you're in a sealed armory that's under bunkers, mounds, bunkered dirt, sealed shut to protect the arms, right? No, obviously there's none there now, but the doors were sealed and some people got it on camera. I didn't think to do that. We indeed did encounter floating orbs. And there's no light source, there's no explanation for this. And, absolutely loved that experience because who knows what it is. And I was on another show. We're not talking like mini ball lightning, even, we understand a little more now that there's ball lightning, though we don't, advance as we think our science is, we don't know much about it. Like Foo Fighters, Was that ball lightning in some cases? But in some cases, I think those were intelligently controlled objects following our bombers into Germany for the bombing raids. Some think, well, that was Nazi tech. Well, if it were Nazi tech, why wouldn't it be knocking down our bombers before it blows the crap out of Germany, right?
I mean, that's a
So
valid point. Yeah, 100%.
and I mean, there's the group called the Foo Fighters based on that whole thing. We still have no understanding, almost 100 years later, what that was, what those things were, what was their intent, what was going on there. And then also presences. Uh, I, I was at work working a midnight shift one night, and my grandfather was in the hospital and I felt him visit. I knew he died. I called my family, they called the hospital, and sure enough, he had passed. You know, the so no one knew until I told them because I was visited by him. I knew it was him. He was telling me. Um, and so then I could tell the others. And then also while growing up uh, in my parents' basement, there was a presence. It was a distinct shape. I could tell there were facial hair. I could tell there was like a bowler hat. Decades upon decades later, we think we kind of figured it out that it was my great grandfather on my mother's side. Now, why he would be in that house that was certainly never built was built long after he died, but there was some object or some connection he had, and he was the presence in that basement. And I never felt threatened. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a like this is built on an Indian burial ground. Get out of here. It was always just a presence, a non-threatening presence, eerie nonetheless.
I mean, I would say so. I mean, I've had some ghostly encounters. Nothing like a ship or anything. Oh, well, I suppose like the top of someone's head. Whenever I was in the Crumlin Road prison in Belfast, which is meant to be the most haunted building in Belfast. Now, obviously a decommissioned prison and it's a tourist attraction. And yeah, it's funny you should say about going to like a 1800s fort, because this weekend I'm going down to Portsmouth to a fortress from the same era to go on a ghost hunt down there on the south coast of England, and I'm very much looking forward to that one. And the Foo Fighters thing, again, it's that is just it inspires a lot of thought and intrigue because of how mysterious it was. Because it was certainly beyond the tech that the Allies and Nazis had at that time. And I've even heard the theory before that it's people from the future taking a look at a really a momentous point, turning point within World War II, and they were actually there to witness it through whatever means, for example. And, I'm open minded. I would
I
even, toy
I
with that idea.
love that you went there.
Yeah,
I love that you went there because, with the balloon thing and they've shot down other things and are there alien craft? I've always loved that discussion. I've visited personally Area 51. You can only
same
get
here.
to the
Yep.
gate, obviously. You can't see a whole lot. I saw the infamous mailbox. Afterwards, we went to lunch. I met Stanton Freeman at the Little Alien in Rachel, Nevada. So I love all that stuff. And I say, and Werner von Braun predicted this was going to happen. I mean, Nazis had alien tech they were trying to reverse engineer, just as we do now. I mean, it's there. I don't doubt that some of what we see now, after all these years, like the Foo Fighter thing, we're 100 years on. We still have no clue what that was. But if Roswell was what it was, assuming no other crash sites, that we obtained that craft after all this time. you can't tell me that we haven't been able to reverse engineer and make some of that ourselves. So, in my mind, some of these UFOs, or UAPs as we call them now, are our advanced tech. Unmanned because we can't stand the G force as it stands, understanding our physics. But I think it's a blend of things. I think it indeed could be alien, some of it, although I think that's the least possible option because of the vast distances of the galaxies in space. I think, like a lot of people, that some of them are also interdimensional because I think while it still would take a ton of energy, if you remember the Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull movie, right? People were upset for, oh God, we're talking about interdimensional beings here. But to me, that almost seems moving in relative space through space and time is easier than interdimensional travel. And also, I coined the term intertimental for time travelers. So I was so glad you brought that up because I think some of these indeed are intertimental from the future, tech so advanced we certainly can't think about it now, but in the future it's possible. Einstein proved the relativity theory and that time travel is conceivable and possible. We're just certainly not there yet. But like you said, like time tourists or space tourists. But if these UFOs, in my mind, were a threat to us, we'd have known it by now. They'd have wiped us out by now.
Yeah, I was just going to say we probably wouldn't know about it by now because we'd all be gone if they were an actual threat to us. But you know, there's a lot of interesting theories behind it. Yeah, interdimensional side. It could be alien tech, perhaps. I mean, if Bob Lazar is anyone to go by, they've been reverse engineering alien tech for years, and it was actually he who first brought it to prominence of Area 51 and stuff being reverse engineered there, and even working in cahoots with other beings from other worlds. Interesting topic, I must say, and we could talk forever, no doubt, about this. But alas, time does march on, and we've overrun a little bit. But again, I don't mind because the topic was interesting. The book, the Nostradamus side, even going into the paranormal side as well. Stuff that I love. And where can people find you, and how can they get their hands on your book?
Yeah, you can get it through any online retailer, of course. Any brick and mortar bookstore also can order it for you. Amazon, of course, and for 80% of all books these days are basically sold through Amazon. So I hate to put more money in Jeff Bezos' pocket, but that's convenient. That's where most people go. But yeah, the easiest to find me at my josephmleonard.us website. That's my author site. Now, it looks like Leonard. It's not French. It's Leonard, but with no O. So josephmleonard.us. That's my author site. I have a book-specific site, terrorstrikes.info. You can go there also. There's a contact tab at either. You can reach out to me if you want to reach out for any reason. And if you're in the United States, if you go to terrorstrikes.info/shop, you can buy an autographed book direct. But again, that's only in the U.S. because of shipping costs. I throw in the shipping. And you can also use discount code INSIDER to get a break off, the list price and free shipping. I think it's pretty cool to have the autographed copy. I've got several in my library from various authors rather than just trying to save $1 or $2 on Amazon. But hey, that's me. We're in a recession. I know money's tight, so.
Well, just got to spend money to make money as it is and help everyone out. But, thank you for coming on to the show this evening. Joseph Leonard, I think I even pronounced it Leonard at the very start of the show, so apologies for that one. But if you're interested in what Joseph has written, then I do recommend that you jump on Amazon and get your hands on that book. Some gleaming reviews there. Joseph Leonard from Detroit, USA, thank you very much for joining me, and I will hopefully speak to you sometime soon.
All right, and just one last thing. I have to say it's Joseph M. Leonard, because there is another Joseph Leonard author. So I certainly want you buying my books, not his books, right?
Joseph M. Leonard. Go search for Joseph M. Leonard, or even just find that book itself, Terror Strikes, Coming to a City Near You. A fascinating read. And again, thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I like being on fun shows like this and talking about things other than just the book.
No, it's honestly, yeah, I'm sure your mind must be frazzled with it, but I definitely do appreciate you coming on to talk about your book and all these different things as well. So again, thank you very much indeed, and I will speak to you soon. Well, that's the first that has happened where it has overrun the outro jingle. But, no complaints there, because he got out very important information there. If you want to get the right author, Joseph M. Leonard there from Michigan, USA, talking about his book, and many other topics as well, which I'm sure you, like I, will no doubt be digging a little bit further into the topics that we've just discussed this evening. And I even have a feeling Joseph may have barely scratched the surface there, which is to be expected with these topics. And we spoke for quite some time after the interview ended, actually, more in depth about UFOs and other topics, so I'm certain he will be returning to the Close Encounters podcast in a later episode. And you know what? At this rate, all my guests so far will fill up season 2, but we'll try to keep it as varied as possible, because I'm sure a couple of the guests, at the very least, will make a reappearance to talk about further updates into their research and other topics that might interest them. Now, let us move on to the celestial events of the upcoming week. So, we're releasing this episode a little bit later, a day later than what we would have planned. It should have been out on the 12th, but it will be out on the 13th. But if you're living in the southern hemisphere, then the celestial events of note taking place this week is happening mostly down in the southern hemisphere. The lunar occultation of Delta Scorpii, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's a constellation I've never heard of nor seen, but this is a significant event. You'd think I was drinking now. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, get your binoculars and telescope out, because that is in prime position to view this event. Moving over to the 15th of this month, everyone should be able to see this. To be fair, the moon is at its last quarter, and that can only mean one thing, that it is getting darker and more favourable conditions to conduct a night watch, or even just stargaze, I suppose. You don't even need anything fancy to do that, and I guess the darker it is, the better it is for viewing and the more things that you'll see. Going back to the southern hemisphere, though, on the same date, the Normid meteor shower is at its peak of 2023. We will not see this in the northern hemisphere because the radial point doesn't rise above the horizon, so we're missing out on that one, but apparently it's quite a good meteor shower. Also in the southern hemisphere on the 15th, Neptune will be at its solar conjunction. Please, 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 I shouldn't have to tell you this, I really shouldn't, but if you're in a position to see it, do not stare directly at the sun. And if you're using any equipment to be able to see this conjunction, be sure to use an appropriate filter, a specialist filter that you need to get for it, okay? But my advice would be don't bother looking at it. It's not worth the risk. And then on the 17th, Mercury will be at the superior solar conjunction. So again, that's an event that you'd really need a telescope with a specialist filter on, but for the love of God, don't try it, please. It's not worth the risk. But, I thought it'd be interesting enough to point that out to you. Well, that appears to be it when it comes to celestial events happening in the sky. And that leaves me only one thing to do, and that is to do the sort of outro, is what we would normally do. Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode, though. We very much appreciate your support. And actually, it's your support that has hurdled us to 13th and 14th place in the Life Sciences category in the UK and Ireland, respectively, on Apple Podcasts. So again, thank you very much for that indeed. Look forward to the next episode, though, where I speak to author and researcher of ancient mysteries, Floyd Wills, about the giants of ancient times. Were they another race of earthbound humanoids, or were they something or someone else entirely? Whatever you do, do not miss that episode. You have been listening to the Close Encounters podcast with me, Chris McMurray, and until next time, have a good week.